Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 82 and I am the show's host, Kyle. For those of you who are frequent listeners to the show, you will know that I haven't done a current events show by myself in about a week. Last Wednesday featured Will Porter talking about Russiagate. He wrote a very interesting article on that, so if anybody wants to go check out Foreign Policy Focus 79, I suggest that. I did a little something different on Foreign Policy Focus 80. I had on Ryan Burgett, who is a great guy to talk about Christianity and the anti-war message. I think we covered a bunch of very important topics, not just what it means to be a Christian and to be anti-war, anti-interventionist, but also maybe how to talk to a Christian about anti-war, anti-intervention issues. So I was really excited about those two episodes. I think everybody should go check them out. The audio quality on the episode with Ryan Burgett wasn't all that great. I really do apologize for that because otherwise it was a completely awesome interview. So hopefully I could take care of the audio issues with recording and future interviews will be higher quality. All right, with that, let's jump into today's stuff. I think the most important thing to talk about today is the exit of Bannon, what his statements were on North Korea, and then the Afghanistan troop increase. So going over first, Bannon leaves. I'm not sure if this was a firing or a choice to resign. Depending on who you talk to, this is either a huge cause for celebration or a cause to cry. It does seem to me that there are some positives and negatives to this. First of all, Bannon is not a non-interventionist. He's not a guy that I would support or somebody who I would typically go out and defend. That being said, in a previous episode titled Established First Nationalists, I kind of broke down how the nationalists at times are better on the foreign policy issue just because they don't want to waste U.S. lives and money overseas in endless wars like Afghanistan. And so when we're looking at the situation, I guess I would like to have somebody in the room to disagree with, maybe a McMaster, a Kelly, a Dunford, or a Mattis on the issue, and hopefully we could get maybe a little less of a hawkish foreign policy at sometimes because we do have Bannon in the room. That being said, Bannon typically isn't good on the issues. He's bad on a lot of stuff, especially involving Iran. So at the end of the day, it's not a huge loss, but it does seem to be probably a half step in the wrong direction. We'll see who ends up replacing him. Maybe it'll be better. As far as it goes, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of the, Trump-style nationalists left at the White House. It seems like they've pretty much all been kicked out by the more establishment members. I think Stephen Miller is usually the one brought up as being the last remaining now that Bannon's gone. I've read reports that said Bannon, I guess, decided that he was going to leave on August 7th, but then didn't hand in his resignation until about a week or a week and a half later before resigning. But after the August 7th window, Bannon issued a statement saying there wasn't a military solution towards North Korea, basically saying that the North Koreans just have so many kind of standard type artillery weapons pointed at the north of South Korea. There's a lot of population up there. About 30 million people live in the range of North Korea's artillery. Although that doesn't mean that North Korea would be able to kill 30 million South Koreans, but they would be able to kill possibly a few millions with those artillery positions if a war were to break out. And Bannon acknowledges and said there's nothing the United States could do, and so we need to seek a diplomatic solution. Both Dunford, General Dunford, who heads the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General Mattis, who is, of course, the Secretary of Defense, have come out and said that, nope, that's not true. We feel that there are military solutions and we are looking for them with North Korea. So I guess that is concerning, having the one guy who said it leaving. However, Bannon did say it. It's on the public record, and he was a man who would know. So I think that's a great thing to have out there. I think the fact that he had to say it was something that I found to be concerning. I feel like that Bannon tends to be somebody who has a kind of good political sense. Obviously, he helped Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton when Hillary Clinton was a highly favored candidate, and Donald Trump was not a very popular man to many Americans. And so I guess I would say, we should keep our eye on the North Korea situation, especially with Bannon gone. If he made this statement, maybe he felt like he had to because the United States was very quickly moving towards that war. There hasn't been a whole lot else coming out of the North Korea situation recently, or at least in the past week, other than the U.S. and South Korea are about to start some military drills near the north of South Korea. This, of course, upsets the North Koreans. I've addressed this on the show several times before, how U.S. war games upset the North Koreans. This isn't being called war games, it's being called military drills. I don't know if that has to do with the size or the scope of the drills or what's going on, or if they're just kind of trying to rebrand it to make it sound more popular or less of a big deal. Either way, it really upsets the North Koreans who call it reckless and, made some vague threats on the other half of that, basically to say that we really don't like what you're doing. No surprise here. This is all standard stuff that I talk about pretty frequently. On the Afghanistan issue, now that this is, I think, the big one coming up, Trump has, of course, or somebody within the White House has announced that Trump will come out tonight and make a speech on the Afghanistan issue, and I guess roll out a new plan for Afghanistan. At least that's what we're hearing from Mattis. There are several parts to this, so I'm just going to start at the top and break it down. First, that's Bannon's role. Bannon was pushing for, and I believe Miller was teaming up with him to do this, and that is to have Erik Prince, formerly of Blackwater, now of whatever he rebranded his company name to be, to wage a private war in Afghanistan. Of course, there are several problems with this plan, including, Blackwater and Erik Prince having very negative reputations, and there probably being some civilian blowback to this just on the face of the marketing issue with it also having a private military in the world. Prince wanted to buy some warplanes out. That would be concerning to me. However, with the resignation or firing of Steve Bannon, it looks less likely that that's going to happen. Also, it was reported that McMaster was blocked Prince from speaking to Trump about this issue. Trump convened a meeting at Camp David, I believe, over the weekend to discuss the issue with Afghanistan and what the U.S. was going to do. I believe 5 or 6 generals, Mattis, Kelly, McMaster, Dunford, and a few others were all invited to this meeting of generals. Mike Pence was also there to discuss what was going to happen in Afghanistan. I've read that McMaster and Pence, Vice President Pence, were going to work together to pitch Trump a plan that would increase troop levels in Afghanistan. I have no idea. They didn't say how many troops that would be to increase. My concern would be that Mattis seems to want to do the 4,000 to 5,000 range. And so McMaster, I would think, would team up with Mattis on this plan unless he disagrees with Mattis on this plan, and that's why he's pulled Pence into his camp. So it may be that McMaster and Pence are pushing a bigger agenda. Mattis has seemed content with that 4,000 troop level number. I'm not sure why. I guess that's probably the amount of troops that the U.S. needs, or the U.S. generals feel they need to insert in Afghanistan to at least stop some of the bleeding and maybe it kind of ensure the capital city of Kabul and the Bagram Air Base. Either way, this is all very concerning, and I don't want to speculate too much on what we're going to hear out of Trump because we're going to hear it from his mouth tonight, and rather than me guessing what's going to happen, it does seem that withdrawal is not on the table. I haven't heard anybody coming out and saying that this person or that person's pitching the withdrawal option. Maybe Trump's going to take it himself. Who knows what Trump's going to do? I think that was one of the things that, non-interventionists like myself hoped for when Trump took office, is that he was just kind of so reckless and so kind of maverickish and do whatever he wanted kind of guy that maybe he would make right decisions on issues like this. So there is always the possibility of withdrawal or drawdown in Afghanistan, but it does look like we're going to get some kind of troop increase, probably 4,000 or more. Thomas Massie, for his part, who is a representative from Kentucky, has taken to Twitter over the past couple of days to do really everything he can to rally any kind of support for withdrawal of the Afghanistan war, saying how much money the U.S. is wasting, what we could do with it at home, and really pleading with people to, put pressure on people so we could get this thing over with. I was even looking on Twitter today, and Trump back in 2013 was bashing Obama for wanting to lot troops into Afghanistan through 2024, and certainly whatever plan he has will at least lot troops into Afghanistan for the next few years, and so if he doesn't want to look like a hypocrite, hopefully he'll withdraw. Other news coming out of Afghanistan that I'd like to touch on. 3 aid workers were killed by a gunman in Afghanistan. The U.S. is increasing the number of airstrikes in Afghanistan, mostly in the Nangarhar province. Of course, this is where ISIS is most active in Afghanistan. From what I'm able to read, ISIS in Afghanistan isn't quite the same as ISIS in maybe Iraq or Syria. It seems to be a little bit more like ISIS in Yemen than anywhere else, or maybe Somalia, where at times they are willing to team up with some of the more Sunni extremist jihadist groups like the Taliban, or in Yemen, Al-Qaeda, or in Somalia, Al-Shabaab, rather than going to war with those groups like they do in Syria and Iraq. However, a lot of the ISIS people are apparently just disenfranchised with the whole Taliban movement. The increased airstrikes are apparently just raining down on civilians. We have civilians saying they feel like they're being treated as a weapons laboratory. That probably in part has to do with the U.S. dropping the MOAB on Afghanistan. While the U.S. continues to rain bombs on the people of Afghanistan, the Taliban are taking to Twitter to post pictures of U.S. weapons that they've seized over the years. It looks like the Taliban are very well equipped with U.S. weapons at this point, and that's very depressing as a U.S. citizen who's, hating paying taxes as it is. But it seems so much worse when those taxes are going to get U.S. Soldiers killed overseas and arming up the Taliban. The Taliban have also sent Trump a letter saying that, hey, please leave Afghanistan. We don't want you here anymore. I'm guessing that Trump isn't going to listen to it, but I just wanted to throw that story out there. Most recent news story coming out of Afghanistan is that one U.S. soldier was killed and others were wounded in fighting with the Taliban. This seems to be slightly different than some of the other U.S. troops who have died, which are in more suicide-like attack. This seemed to be out on a mission, which is concerning. I haven't read any reports of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan moving closer to front lines and moving into more of a just fighting role rather than a advise and assist role, training the Afghan security forces. However, that may be taking place. Other news stories. We have the USS John McCain, which is a destroyer. I reported on this ship last week, actually, sailing close to a Chinese island as kind of a show of force of a right of navigation. They do this really weird thing where whenever they, sail a USS ship into a enemy territory or enemy claimed island, they'll call it, a way to show the freedom of navigation, saying that anybody has a right to go here and we're going to sail our ship here to prove it. China, for their part, doesn't really have a whole lot of military responses to this and typically just comes out and condemns it. However, the USS John McCain did that last week. This week, we had the USS John McCain running into a merchant ship, possibly some kind of oil tanker, right? If you guys go look at a map and look at where Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand really all come together, right in that more narrow stretch of water right there is where apparently the USS John McCain ran into that oil ship. Or some kind of irony to the USS John McCain last week, showing freedom of navigation near Chinese island and then running into a ship over in the same kind of area pretty quickly. This is apparently the fourth such incident where a USS ship had some kind of problems within the kind of Asia area, either running into a ship, running a land, or having some other kind of problem. Of course, the USS running into a ship off the coast of Japan cost a few U.S. sailors their lives, and we already have 10 missing from the McCain incident, and so this, again, very concerning, and hopefully we're going to see these sailors found. But again, whenever we're sailing so many of these destroyers and other ships around the world, it's only a matter of time before these bad incidents happen and U.S. sailors end up dead for absolutely no reason. The U.S. is apparently going to launch some kind of investigation to try to figure out what's going on in the Asia-Pacific area and why so many U.S. ships are having troubles over there all of a sudden. We have only 4,000 migrants reaching Italy from Libya since mid-July. This is a sharp decrease since that time last year. Of course, last week I reported that the Italian army was pairing with the Libyan Coast Guard to start firing on aid ships attempting to rescue these migrants. I'm not sure how much that has to do with the reduction in migrants. It doesn't seem that anybody really has a firm conclusion as to why this is going on, but it does seem like there is a reduction in the amount of refugees reaching Europe from Africa. Other news coming out of Africa, we have 3 U.S. airstrikes on Somalia, southern Somalia, al-Shabaab-controlled area. The U.S. says those airstrikes hit al-Shabaab. Residents say they hit civilians. This seems to be a trend that I'm noticing more and more, where civilians are disputing with the Americans. When the Americans come out and say, no, we hit terrorists, the civilians will come out and say, no, you actually killed civilians. I believe the civilians say that 2 or 3 children were actually killed in these attacks, and that it was mostly women and children killed. Uganda right now has 1 million South Sudanese refugees who have fled South Sudan, where they have pretty much ethnic fighting going on there that has been going on forever. I just mentioned this story because the U.S. under Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama thought they found the solution to the problem in Sudan by breaking the country into 2. And again, what we see is that U.S. interventionism really has no positive effects, as once again, we just have a lot of civilians fleeing, ethnic fighting, same old stuff going on in that region. In Kenya, we have protesting going on after the election. I think I touched on last week that 24 people have been killed in protesting. They held an election. The government that was in charge won and the opposition lost. The opposition claims this is because the government rigged the election somehow. Apparently, the case will go to the Kenyan High Court, but it doesn't expect any overturn. One of the more disturbing incidents that has come out of this is that the Kenyan police were looking to round up protesters, specifically a woman who was out doing some kind of protesting, and they found her and they started beating her with batons. The woman was sleeping with her 6-month-old baby in her arms, and that baby was beaten into a coma by the police. I haven't heard any updates on the condition of that baby so far. This is one of the interesting things. I think everybody in the U.S. always has this idea that democracy is always going to bring more stability, but in African countries, it often seems that anytime they hold an election, there's just so much rioting that goes on because nobody trusts or, believes in the validity of the elections, that every time we have an election, it's always met with protesting, disaster, and discord. And so maybe in some of these countries, democracy isn't always the answer, and the U.S. policy of wanting to spread democracy all over the world maybe isn't the solution to all the world's problems. Big news coming out of Iraq, and as we have the invasion of Tel Afar incoming. Tel Afar is, I think, probably the biggest city that right now in Iraq that's still held by ISIS. The city is kind of northwest of Mosul, moving closer to the Syrian border than Mosul is. I believe it's a town that has some more jihadist sympathies among the civilian population and certainly isn't happy with the Shia government in Baghdad. This invasion will be different from the Mosul invasion, as the Shia militias, the Popular Mobilization Forces, will be involved in this invasion. They were not involved in the invasion of Mosul. That was largely for political reasons, as many of the people in Mosul probably would have rejected any kind of Shia militias trying to come and liberate their city, even as much as they don't like ISIS. This situation isn't necessarily better. The U.S. has already stepped up airstrikes on the city, and we have civilians fleeing. There's an estimated 50,000 civilians in the fleet in the city. The way the U.S. has been dropping airstrikes on the city of Raqqa and Mosul towards the end, this is a very concerning thing, because they seem to be willing to bomb ISIS pretty much without discretion at this point, willing to hit civilians and kill as many civilians as they need in an attempt to liberate cities that are now turned into rubble. The other big story coming out of Iraq is that we were supposed to have the Kurdish independence vote on September 25th. However, the Kurds may be willing to postpone that vote in exchange for concessions from the Iraqi government. I've been unable to find out what concessions that the Kurds will be willing to settle on or what they're looking for, but it does seem that maybe economic relief of some kind and help rebuilding some of their cities would be something that they are looking for. The U.S., for their part, has been very concerned about the Kurds voting on independence. I think that most of the governments in the area fear it, and it could create maybe a Kurdish independent movement that could create a lot of problems for everyone in the area. A spokesman for the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is largely the Kurdish force that the U.S. is backing in Syria, said that the U.S. will remain in Syria for decades to come. I don't know where he's getting this information or if it's maybe just propaganda to the Kurdish population there, but it's always concerning when we have a spokesman coming out and saying things like that. Obviously, this would eventually lead to some kind of conflict with the Syrian government, who at least claims that they are the, rightful rulers of all of Syria and seem willing and will probably one day be able to reclaim most of Syria and control it. From about August 14th to the 17th, we had the U.S. killing 59 civilians in Raqqa, including at least 21 children. Moving to the other side of Syria, we have U.S. Special Forces will begin training Lebanese army soldiers to fight alongside with Hezbollah against ISIS on the Syria Lebanon border. One thing I'd like to talk about real quick is I had a conversation with some people who have a little bit more intimate knowledge of what's going on in Syria, and they were able to tell me that Hezbollah has actually been one of the losers of the Syrian civil war, not a winner as I portrayed them in past episodes of this podcast. It seems that unlike maybe Russia and some of the Iranian militias, the Hezbollah forces in Syria have taken some pretty heavy losses, and that has been detrimental to them. Also, that has caused them to fall out of favor with some of the people of Lebanon, who start to view Hezbollah as a protection force against Israel. But going and running around and trying to liberate the neighboring country has caused some blowback for them in that issue. In central Syria, we have Syrian rebels claiming to have shot down a Syrian plane and claiming to have captured the pilot. I have no idea what they used to shoot down, if these were maybe the man pads that Saudi Arabia gave to the rebels through the United States or not, but whenever they have these pilots, it could give them some negotiation leverage with the Syrian government. Moon of Alabama writes on the possible coming conflict near Deir ez-Zor. We have the Syrian Arab army, the Assad government, continuing to make up a lot of territory and ground in central Syria, moving from the Tabuk area down towards the Raqqa, or not, the Deir ez-Zor area. Deir ez-Zor lies on the Euphrates, and other than Raqqa, is probably the largest city that ISIS continues to hold at least a portion of. The Syrian government has managed to hold a small enclave of the city throughout the Syrian civil war for many years, being able to hold that position even when the U.S. airstrikes hit Syrian soldiers in that position. Once the Syrian government takes Deir ez-Zor, they could then try to cross the Euphrates River, which could create a problem with the U.S. soldiers, the U.S. Bad Forces, the SDF soldiers, which are now, as well as taking the city of Raqqa, also moving south of the city of Raqqa towards Deir ez-Zor. I think this would probably be the next hotspot between Russia, United States, and Syria, and the Syrian government within Syria, and this is the place we need to keep our eyes on, the Euphrates River Valley near Deir ez-Zor. Moving to Yemen, we have the Saudi coalition being responsible for 51% of child deaths in Yemen. This is at least according to the UN. Saudi Arabia is also responsible for 75% of attacks on schools and hospitals. Very disturbing trend. The United States, of course, supporting Saudi Arabia in their war against the Houthis in Yemen. The UN also says that Saudi Arabia is really fueling the humanitarian catastrophe going on in Yemen right now by preventing humanitarian aid or delaying humanitarian aid from reaching northern Yemen. We also have Yemeni activist Hisham al-Omasi, I believe is how you say his name. I'll spell it out right now. Hishamalomesy. He is a Yemeni activist that I follow on Twitter, provides a lot of good information other than, just giving insight of what it's like to live within a city like Sana'a, where they're so oppressed, there's so many airstrikes going on all the time. He's the one that's often tweeting out, how he's trying to find his child's school by deciding which one's less likely to be hit by a Saudi airstrike and which ones have shatterproof glass and stuff like that. He's also been an advocate and appeared on Western media sources to, say, hey, look at what the Saudis are doing to us. This is really terrible, the situation in Yemen. It looks like the Houthis have kidnapped him, and that this is disturbing. Of course, sometimes people like me and, other people who advocate for anti-war positions often accuse us of maybe being pro groups like Iran, Russia, or the Houthis, when really that's not the case. It's just the United States is back in Saudi Arabia, and it bothers me that the United States is selling the bombs to Saudi Arabia that they used to blow up all these schools and children. Some other news I want to touch on. National Review wrote an article on how the United States could get out of the Iran nuclear deal. It looks like that they kind of almost admit there that while they don't like the deal, that Iran isn't breaking the deal. So they basically says the United States need to push Iran to break the deal. I think it's a really important article because I think it's the type of article that could be used by a McMaster or Mike Pence to push Donald Trump to, say, hey, these are easy ways we could get out of the Iran nuclear deal. Of course, I think it'll blow up in the United States face if they do, but withdrawing from the deal would be a very bad thing. In the United States, we have 2 victims of the CIA torture program who were, innocent people who were just rounded up for no reason and then tortured, suing the designers of the program, Dr. Jessen and Dr. Mitchell. These are 2 psychologists who designed a torture program to basically break a human mind. Their whole goal was try to just make somebody so crazy, I guess they would give up all their secret information. Of course, this doesn't work, and it's a completely sick thing to do. I have no problem saying that Dr. Jessen and Dr. Mitchell are equivalent to the Nazi and Japanese doctors who used their medical knowledge during World War II to torture either maybe Jewish, Gypsy, or Chinese people and performed really sick medical experiments on them. My personal background is in the field of psychology, and my day job is working with people who have mental illnesses and trying to help them get better. And to see some people like this use their information, their knowledge of the human mind to break it rather than heal it is one of the most sick things that I have ever seen. In Spain, we had a terror attack killing at least 14 innocent people, and I believe police killing about 5 terrorists or 6 terrorists in total. Again, blowback everyone. Looks like the terrorist was probably from Morocco, at least one of them. We also had a bunch of the terrorists who were killed wearing fake suicide belts. Kind of an interesting thing to wear a fake suicide belt, looking like you have bombs on or whatever, Tommy Boy type of style thing. Hopefully we, I'm not sure, why the terrorists would be wearing these fake suicide belts or anything like that. I'm guessing maybe it's to provoke fear or an overreaction from police. Maybe they don't have the ability or skills to actually make bombs in a suicide vest as, kind of easy as it sounds like, all you're trying to do is blow yourself up in some way, but maybe they really don't have either the ability or the care to do it, and that's causing them to wear fake belts and then just get shot down by the police. The Intercept has created this terror database basically for people who were either accused or suspected of being accused of terrorism, charged with terrorism in the United States. An interesting number is that there's been about 808 cases of people accused of terrorism actually going to trial in the United States. Since 2001, only 5 of those people have ever been acquitted or found innocent. Many of the people were caught up in sting operations. Of course, a lot of Americans interpret the sting operation on these young Muslim men as, oh, we're finding the actual bad ones, but really that's not what's happening. Typically, the U.S. FBI or their informants target men who are, kind of socially awkward, have some kind of mental illness, low IQ, and then take advantage of them and get them to buy some kind of thing at the hardware store. And while they would have never done anything like this, just in the normal course of their lives after being influenced by the FBI, they're willing to. We actually saw this in a case of a young white man in Oklahoma City whose family says he has paranoid schizophrenia. But an FBI informant talked him into attempting to blow up a bank in Oklahoma City. So, maybe stories like that will bring it a little bit more reality to the situation to average Americans. The UK, their Navy has launched their largest ship. It's a near 1,000-foot aircraft carrier. Iran has frozen the asset of 150 journalists of BCC Persia. I guess Iran doesn't like BCC Persia. However, there are a lot of people who write for that news source who either have family or who live or assets in Iran, and Iran is trying to crack down on those people. Israel has been talking about doing the same thing to Al Jazeera for years. Israel has started out by targeting one Al Jazeera journalist and revoking his press credentials. And the last and final big news story that I want to touch on, that is Chinese and Indian troops threw some rocks at each other and had some small clashes up near the Himalayas in the Kashmir area, where kind of Pakistan, India, and China all come together. This is something we just need to keep our eyes on, as China and India are very large nuclear powers, and we don't want any conflict coming out over some mountains up there. Alright, that'll do it for my show today. I hope everybody liked the show. If you did, please share the show. The best place to share the show is either by going to Kyle's Files on Facebook and liking that page, or going to my website for the podcast, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. Share on Twitter, Facebook, whatever you got. I really appreciate it. It will help the show to grow. It does make a big difference when anybody shares the show. I do notice it. So if you guys could all do that for me, I would really appreciate it. That's how we make difference. That's how we make gains here. You also follow me on Twitter at KYAAALE. My personal website is kylesfilesblog.com, and I write at thelibertarianinstitute.org. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in, and I'll be back with another show on Wednesday.